Okay, next we'll be looking at urban poverty. Let's do some guessing. How much of urban population is currently living in inadequate housing? Well, inadequate housing, I guess, would be what most people call the slums. The answer is 31.6%, and this is actually an outdated data in 2001. I didn't manage to find a more updated data. So urban populations in less developed region increased by 36% in the last 10 years, and it is likely that the number of slum households increased by a higher proportions. So this is some of the statistics I got from UN Habitat. Sub-Saharan Africa has actually the highest proportions of people living in slum areas, maybe followed by South Central Asia, and plenty in Latin American and Caribbean region. Slum exists in most metropolitans around the world, but how much do we know about them? So in popular culture, these are probably the two famous movies where we get to know a little bit about slum, accurately or not. So there was this award-winning Slumdog Millionaire talking about how a kid who grew up in slum eventually became a millionaire through a TV program. And also City of God, which in my opinion is a classic. Maybe you wanna check out these two movies if you haven't. But if we know about slums only through these movies, that actually say some things about the characteristic of the slums. That people who are from outside of the slums generally do not know much about the slum, and they are pretty much quite isolated from the rest of the communities that they are in. So these are the characteristics of slums that I draw from UN Habitat: lack of basic services, substandard housing, overcrowding, unhealthy living conditions, insecure tenures. You might be asked to get out of the area anytime by the authority or by violence. And poverty and social exclusion. Social exclusion was what I was trying to say just now, how people out of slum know nothing about the slums. And minimum settlement size. Okay, but slums really are different in different places. They might share a lot of similar characteristics, but they are also very different in different parts of the world. So there are really different kinds of slums when we talk about slums. So you want to have a guess on which country these slums are located in. How about this one? So this one is the famous slum in Mumbai, the Dharavi slum in Slumdog Millionaire, where the kids were growing up. And then this is in Nairobi, one of the biggest slums in Nairobi. And this is in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, a shanty town. That's what people will call it. So they look a little bit different from each other, isn't it? And then this is one of the slums in Manila, which is in Philippines. And then we have also interesting housings in other parts of the world which might or might not look like a slum. So this is the exterior of a coffin home in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong has very high density population. So the rental and the land prices were extremely expensive, and many people could not afford it. So there are 88,000 coffin home in Hong Kong. And this is the interior of a coffin home. You cook side by side with the toilet. Okay. So initially, slums are places where rural people who first migrate to towns or cities reside before they earn enough income and establish themselves and move to somewhere else. So it's a transitional point, you can say. But why are the poor getting more concentrated? And why are some areas getting worse in terms of poverty? So these are being argued that the poor getting more concentrated and some slums area getting worse in terms of poverty are being argued by several social scientists, including Wilson and Airo, whose writing I have asked you to read as your class readings. So the concentration of poverty, in the case of the US, actually we have talked a little bit about this in the race and poverty lecture, but there's some policies that actively contribute to the concentration of poverty in so-called inner cities in the United States. So previously I have talked about the Federal Housing Administration's their redlining policies of black neighborhoods in the 1940s and 1950s, and also the constructions of public housing projects mainly in inner city poor and black neighborhoods. A class reading which I have directed you to in Vox.com actually quite nicely illustrate this process. So in the 1940s and 1950s, the governments were providing mortgages to people to own homes. They selectively allow mortgages to different areas in the cities. So for example, here some investors or developers want to build some housing near a black neighborhood. But the Federal Housing Administration say it is too close to this harmonious group. Sorry, so I will not back loan to you because it's too risky, because the investment is unlikely to have good returns and the places might have deteriorating property values because this is near a black neighborhood. And then the developers come back and say, okay, I will build a wall so that I can segregate the places that I want to develop from a black neighborhood. Because of the implementations of such policies, you can see that there are stronger and stronger segregations and separations between other places or other communities from black neighborhoods. And there are other concurrent policies, such as new fiscal policies resulting in drastic cuts in federal aid to cities whose population have become more brown and black. And the offer of mortgage interest tax exemptions and mortgages for veterans, which actually facilitated working and middle-class white families from inner city neighborhoods to suburban areas. So this is the further segregations of black and white. And then federal transportation and highway policies created an infrastructure for jobs in the suburbans. As Wilson mentioned in his 2009 book, the manufacturing jobs are currently more than 70% of them are located in suburban area, and the wholesale and retail has just under 70% of their jobs located in suburban areas. So you can see that the jobs are moved from the inner city or the city center to suburban areas, facilitated by infrastructure such as highways. And at the same time, these freeway and highway networks actually cut through the hearts of many cities, led to the destruction of many viable low-income black neighborhoods. And there are really no effective labor market policies to safeguard the real value of the minimum wage in the cities. So this has made it increasingly difficult for people who are still residing in inner cities to support their families. So these various policies and infrastructure projects, some of them have explicit racial bias, some of them not, have together concentrate more and more poverty in the inner city area. So at this point, I want to pause the lecture and ask some interlude questions. Do you see a similar trend of poverty concentration in other parts of the world? Why and why not? According to your own observations, which parts of cities are slums typically located? Okay, thank you very much. See you in the next part.